When he was accused of corrupting the youth, he just grinned. He didn't roll his eyes. He didn't make excuses. He just looked into the face of his judges, people who called themselves defenders of morality, and grinned. It was not a mockery, but a calm understanding. The truth is not in loud accusations, but in what remains unsaid. The fact is that these people are not afraid of his words, but of the freedom of thought that he awakened in young minds. He could have said a lot. I could remind you that a few years earlier, the same Athens executed 10 of its best military leaders, the heroes of the naval battle of Arginus, just because they could not bury the fallen during the storm. I could ask, who really corrupts the youth? The one who teaches you to ask questions, or those who execute the innocent in a fit of collective hysteria? But Socrates chose something else. And you try not to corrupt when young men come to me on their own, he said. And there was no challenge in his voice, only calm confidence. With questions, with a thirst for truth. They don't come for rules, but for understanding. And it was the truth. He never recruited students, did not put a sign on the door school of philosophy. They came by themselves, the sons of wealthy Athenians, young artisans, future politicians. They came because in a city where everyone pretended to know the answers to all the questions, there was one person who honestly confessed, I know I don't know anything, and this aroused their trust. His method had nothing to do with what would be called brainwashing today. He did not demand blind obedience, did not force them to memorize dogmas. On the contrary, he was liberating. His maieutic, the art of midwifery, helped to form thoughts in the minds of his interlocutors. He asked simple questions at first glance. What is justice? Is it possible to learn virtue? What makes a person good? And these questions, like a scalpel, revealed the emptiness of ready-made formulations. Yes, it was painful to admit that you don't understand what you've been talking about confidently all your life is humiliating. It was much easier to declare Socrates the corrupter than to admit. He did not put the poison of doubt into their heads. He simply stopped feeding them the sweet lies of certainty. The irony was that it was those who shouted about morality who pushed the youth for the worse. They taught us to obey blindly, not to think, to accept the rules of the game, where it is not the truth that wins, but the one who shouts louder. Socrates proposed something revolutionary: responsibility for one's own beliefs. Are they saying that I am corrupting the youth? He could have said, but isn't it more corrupting when a person repeats something they don't believe in? When he's afraid to ask why? When does one accept injustice? Because it is accepted. He stood before the judges, this stocky, balding old man with rough features and penetrating eyes, and his calmness was scarier than any rhetoric. They wanted to see remorse, fear, and a desire to beg for forgiveness, and he just looked at them and grinned, because he knew that even if they killed him, they would not be able to kill the questions he had sown. And this was his main victory. He did not teach as they teach in schools, methodically, steadily, hammering ready-made truths into their heads like nails into a board. His method was different, a fierce, almost dangerous dance of thought. He did not dictate knowledge, did not require mechanical repetition of memorized formulas. No, he was provoking. He took the mind by the throat and shook it until all the false beliefs, all the superficial judgments poured out of it. It was an intellectual extreme. He brought the interlocutor's mind to the limit, to the boiling point, to the very moment when consciousness, having gone through excruciating tension, suddenly experienced a breakthrough, a clear, almost physical enlightenment, mental orgasm. Yes, that's right, because each of his dialogues was not just a conversation. It was a challenge, a fight, a test of honesty with oneself. As soon as you utter a platitude, express a common opinion, He already catches your words, like an experienced swordsman catches a careless lunge. He opened your statements surgically precisely, exposing their essence. He turned it around in front of you like a mirror, in which you suddenly saw not a beautiful picture, but the ugly truth about your own beliefs. And before you knew it, he was stripping your thoughts naked, leaving them naked and defenseless before the cold light of logic. It turned out that you didn't know what you were talking about, that your deep thoughts were just someone else's words, accidentally stuck in your head. And he knew. I knew from the very beginning where this conversation was going. He knew where the truth was hidden, but he didn't tell you. He forced you to find her yourself. It was painful, humiliating, fine, like a surgeon who opens an abscess without anesthesia. He inflicted pain in order to heal. His questions were a scalpel cutting through the thick of prejudice. What is justice? What is it? He asked the warrior. What is beauty? The artist. What is good? The politician. And each time it turned out that those who considered themselves experts did not really understand the essence of what they were talking about so confidently. But there was a special grace in this cruelty. He didn't leave you at a loss. He led you on to new questions, to new insights. His irony was not humiliating, but liberating. As Plato would later say, Socrates delivered the minds, helping to give birth to the truth that was already in us, but which we could not discern. That was the paradox of his method. He made people think they didn't know anything, so they could really find out. He destroyed it in order to rebuild it. He destroyed illusions to open the way to true knowledge. And those who went through this ordeal could never think the same way again. He was saying, do you want to become wise? Take the crown off the ego, and the fear is the one you wrapped yourself in like a warm blanket, cozy but blind. These words were a challenge to the entire Athenian society, in a city where it was more important to appear than to be, where reputation was valued above the truth. Socrates proposed a dangerous path, the path of absolute honesty with oneself. Why is it so difficult? Because the truth requires nudity. She doesn't tolerate masks, social roles, or convenient illusions. It requires vulnerability, the kind that makes your throat tighten and your back go cold. Sincerity, which is scary to be. It's scary because there's no protection behind it, no status, no money, no beautiful words, just you and your truth. When they told him that he was spoiling morality, he just grinned again. I'm not spoiling, he said. I'm just dusting with your hypocrisy. And that was the point. He saw what others were afraid to admit. Their virtue was theater, beautiful gestures without content. They observed the rituals, but they did not think about the meaning. They respected the laws, but they didn't ask if they were fair. They judged others, but they didn't look into themselves. Why did it piss him off so much? Because morality based on pretense is not a virtue, but a fake one. It's like a temple without a deity. Beautiful columns, but empty inside. Do you call this morality? He could have asked. Then explain. Why is your ideal citizen afraid to ask a question? Why does your virtue require blindness? His method was simple and ruthless. He took beautiful words, justice, courage, piety, and forced people to define what they meant. And each time it turned out that there was nothing behind the loud terms, just habits, fear, and the desire to conform. But was he a destroyer? No, he was a purifier, like a doctor who opens an abscess so that the wound can heal. Yes, it hurts. Yes, it's ugly. But that's the only way to heal. Are you saying I'm undermining the foundations? He would have said. But is it possible to undermine something that is already rotten? I'm not destroying morality, I'm showing you where it doesn't exist. And that was his great mission. Not to teach goodness, but to help people distinguish real goodness from fake. not to give answers, but to teach you to ask the right questions. The last one sounded like this: if you are so sure that you are right, why are you afraid to doubt? He lived with the most quarrelsome woman in Athens. Xantippe, that was the name of his wife, was not a gift. She embodied everything that the Greeks despised in women: a sharp temper, a sharp tongue, indomitable rage. Contemporaries were whispering, "How does a wise man tolerate such a thing?" She screamed in squares, argued with neighbors, and hurled words, and those words hurt more than cobblestones. Once, in a fit of anger, she poured a chamber pot on Socrates' head. The philosopher just dusted himself off and remarked, "It always rains after thunder." But he was patient, not because he was weak-willed, but because he saw it as a higher school. Whoever survived with her can argue with any god. He told his students. That was the whole Socrates thing. He turned everyday hell into a philosophical experiment. Because the truth, as he knew, is born not in monastic silence, but in everyday chaos, not on tablets, but in dirty dishes and family scandals. If you can keep your mind clear when someone is shouting in your face, it means you are ready for a dialogue with existence itself. He despised politicians, not all of them, but those who turn the agora into a theater of hypocrisy. They waved their arms, swore by the gods, promised mountains of gold, but it was worth asking a simple question: what is the justice that you preach? How their speeches crumbled like rotten boards. He didn't like poets. They recited beautiful poems about valor and honor. But when he asked, "Are you ready to die for these ideals?" they turned pale and muttered something about fiction. He laughed at chatterers, those who could talk for hours about high things, but got lost when it came to simple things. How to live honestly, how not to betray yourself, not because they were bad, but because they were afraid. They were afraid of the truth, like children are afraid of the dark. They loved words beautiful, resonant, and comfortable. Words are clothes, words are masks, but the truth, for them, the truth was like that courtesan who knows how to seduce, but never strips naked. And here's the amazing thing: the politicians he ridiculed came to him anyway. The poets he had baffled returned. The talkers endured his humiliation, because deep down, everyone craves the truth, even if it burns like a red-hot iron. Socrates knew that a person can endlessly pretend, but sooner or later, he will get tired of his own lies. And then he will come, with questions, with pain, with hope. How the young men came to him, how his enemies came to him. How will death itself come to him? Not with a sword, but with a cup of hemlock. In order to make a final experiment, is it possible to kill the truth? We know the answer. When the judges told him, "Shut up," he replied, "No." One word, just one word, but it contained his whole philosophy. They wanted to silence him, admit his guilt, and repent. But he couldn't, because silence in front of a lie is already a betrayal of the truth. When his friends, trembling with fear, whispered, "Run, we'll bribe the guards," he asked, "Why?" Not out of pride, not out of stubbornness, because running away would mean agreeing to their justice. It would turn him into a fugitive, a criminal, and thus confirm their case. No, he couldn't give them that victory. He drank the poison, calmly, no tantrums, no theatrical farewells. Like a man who finished his water after a long thirst. I lived my life the way I wanted to. And you, yours. Those were his last words. No accusations, no complaints, just a cold, precise reminder. Everyone makes a choice. He chose the truth. They chose convenience. And that was the terrible power of his last lesson. He wasn't asking for pity. He didn't demand a confession. He just was until the very end. What's left after him? Not books. He didn't write anything. not a school. He didn't create a teaching, just a question that has been asked for 2,500 years. Are you ready? Are you ready, like him, to say no when they demand silence from you? Are you ready, like him, to ask why? When everyone around you is running, shouting, obeying, are you ready to drink your cup to the dregs, not with ostentatious heroism, but with quiet, absolute acceptance? If so, then you have understood Socrates, not the Socrates they draw in textbooks, the bearded sage with the grandiloquent speeches, and the real one, prickly, uncomfortable, uncompromising, the one who laughed at those in power, the one who annoyed the smart guys, the one who was considered dirty because he was not afraid to climb into the very dirt of life in order to find the purity of truth in it. He did not die as a martyr, not like a hero, and as a man who preferred death to lies. And this is his last, most terrible, and most beautiful gift to us. You can always choose, even when it seems that there is no choice. Socrates, just a name, and an eternal example.